Why do I reflect on happiness and start the book that way? And where is he in his life? Certain things in writing novels have to just be unplanned and instinctual. And I spent a year getting ready to write this book, and I had many, many, many pages of notes, which I studied and immersed myself in. And when I sat down on the day that I thought that I would be beginning to write this book, the first thing I wrote was happiness. And it was entirely unplanned, and I think entirely instinctual. And I saw what I wrote, and I thought, well, okay, I guess that's fate in a way. Fate says write happiness, and so that set for me a kind of arc for the book, that this would then be a book about how to be happy at a time in your life when you are old, and maybe many things are in your memory and many bad things may be passing in front of you, but how do you make yourself happy? And I just thought to myself, well, that's a good subject to write a novel about. If I had thought to myself, well, no, that's not a good subject to write a novel about, I would have erased happiness and put something else. But I thought that at this time in Frank's life, when his son is dying, when maybe his life is relatively short, happiness was worth writing about. I didn't feel I had to. My book is about illness, that is to say, it has illness and death in it. Whether it's about illness and death is another matter. I think it's about happiness in spite of illness and death. But the kinds of urges and drives that make you put something in a book are always very complicated. It's never for one reason or for 2 reasons or 3 reasons. It's usually for 5 reasons. And the principal reason of the 5 is that I wanted to have something that would be dramatic. I wanted it to be a book about Paul Bascombe at the end of his life and how he and his father, in spite of illness, his father's old, Paul is dying, in spite of these impediments, they can still say to each other, I love you. And Paul says to his father, I love you. And that seemed to me to be the way to resolve illness and old age. Well, why do I come back to the relationship between parents and children in spite of flaws and difficulties? Because I think that's the most, or at least one of the most important subjects that there is in the world. The relationship between children and their parents. That's a little laboratory for all of human experience. It's a laboratory for all of morality and all of ethics. How we relate to the people that we are supposed to love, how we relate to the people who we have brought into the world and who have brought us into the world, is integral to the human condition. What is my relationship to writing? That's a very good question, and the proper question that you should ask someone who's 80 years old. I'm trying to think to myself, there is time and there is a reason to bring to the world something else that I can make. And it's in writing novels, like everything that you do that is artistic in nature, is ultimately optimistic. And I would like to be, at this end of my life, optimistic. It's optimistic because you don't know the future, but you'd like to do something that would maybe inform people in the future in a way that would please them. And you would like to think that the world will last long enough, that there is time for what I do to be savored by someone in the future. Well, what is the point of view of voters in America toward the obligation and the privilege to vote? I know, as you say, that very few people, well, I shouldn't say very few, but fewer than should vote in Italy. Many fewer than should vote in the United States. You know, in Australia, there is a law which says you have to have 100% voting. Everyone has to vote in Australia. It's the law. Why there would not be such a law in every democracy, I don't understand. Because it's such a privilege and it's such a responsibility and it's so consequential to vote. But Americans, we live on this enormous land mass, and people who live in Montana, where Christina and I live, they don't really quite understand that Washington, D.C. is the capital of the country. They don't really admit that. They think Washington, D.C. is the capital of Washington, D.C. So Americans tend to be overly preoccupied with their independence and with their freedom. And one of their ways of expressing their independence is not to vote. It's crazy. It's crazy not to vote. You must vote. And I think in a country like ours, if you do vote, if 100% of the people voted in America, the country would be 100% better. Well, I'm very sorry that anybody wants to shoot Donald Trump. I think it should be possible for him to simply lose and not have to die. It's crazy to shoot somebody like that. He should be driven out of office and driven out of the public notice by democratic and electoral means. Shooting is absolutely intolerable, I think. That said, he should never be president again. He should never have been president once. He's a moron and an idiot and a bad man and a crazy man, really. And this woman who's running against him, Ms. Harris, is quite competent. She wouldn't have been my choice, but I will certainly vote for her with complete enthusiasm and elation, really. It's good for America to have a woman of color be President of the United States. It's good for America to have that section of the population feel that they are engaged. It's good for America to have a woman be President of the United States. Many more women in America than men. They should be represented. So I'm completely behind Ms. Harris. What is the role of intellectual writers? We have a great responsibility as intellectual writers in the United States. We get to vote. Other than that, zero.